Okay, let's talk a little bit about group decision making now. So, are groups smarter than individuals? All right. Imagine there's an important decision that has to be made. Would you rather one person just decide it or an actual group decide it? Just so you know, groups could bring more knowledge, perspective, experience, and ideas to the decision. So, shouldn't groups make better decisions? It makes intuitive sense. But we've talked about all of these other group related potential biases and problems throughout this entire course. And so there could be issues related to social influence, conformity, status, pressure, bias, unequal participation, maybe some social loafing. Just having others present can change how people behave. So, at what point does a discussion make a group wiser, and when does it make the group more likely to get something wrong? Okay, so let's start out by talking about how having a discussion doesn't always make people move more toward the center or the middle, so to speak. So, yep, what happens when like-minded people talk? Okay, so we have a group of like-minded people having a discussion. So individual opinions already lean in one direction. Most people agree in general. And so we all get along, we all pretty much agree. What happens after that? Okay. Do the views stay about the same? Do they become a little bit more center? Do they become more extreme? What are you going to predict here? And yes, I have pictures here of from the People's Temple. This is while they were still in California. They had a snack shack. Look, we went on retreats. This is them outside of the People's Temple Church. So, and the direction does depend on the initial tendency. Just so we're here, just so I make this clear here. Um, what if the group starts out as slightly cautious? That might actually make them more cautious. What if they start out slightly risky? Maybe more risky, more supportive, or mildly supportive, mildly opposed, more opposed. Okay, that's important. So, what direction were they already kind of headed? That's important. And in whatever direction they were already kind of headed, that's where we're gonna go. And this is what drives us toward what's called group polarization. Now, polarization, it kind of sounds like they split in half, but that's not what's happening here. This is when the average position becomes more extreme from where it originally was. So again, this group who already kind of pretty much agreed and were getting along, now their opinions become more extreme in that same direction. Before the discussion, I think this is a pretty good idea. This is what we believe. After you have that discussion, this is definitely what we believe. Anybody that doesn't believe this is a terrible person, and this is the only way to think. Now, why I chose the People's Temple here, because I've talked about Jim Jones and Jonestown, is because this is kind of what happened in that they had a fairly mainstream, there was pretty much, Jim Jones started a fairly mainstream, Christian-based religious movement in California that was very much pro civil rights and diversity, I believe in the 1960s. Forgive me if I'm wrong on here. In California, and this is kind of what started. There were just mainstream beliefs. But what happened is you had very like-minded people coming together, and you had Jim Jones, who was a charismatic leader who kind of guided those perspectives and these groups having these discussions, and he guided these perspectives toward a more polarizing belief system. to the extent that they relocated to Guyana and took on very, very strong beliefs, isolated themselves, had a variety of rituals. And Jim Jones became so paranoid that it ended in the drinking of cyanide-laced Kool-Aid and the deaths of 918 people. This is kind of how this happens. And the research on group polarization, it describes like discussion intensifies as the initial tendency rather than creating a new position. The position is already there. It just becomes more extreme in nature. And everyone doesn't have to have the identical perspective to start with. It's just a general direction in nature. So the question is, why would talking to people who agree with us make us that much more extreme? And just some ideas. You're going to hear more arguments that support the position. There's more confidence. These ideas get validated. People want to fit in. There's that normative social influence. Everybody reinforces everybody else. And as a result of that, it's almost as if you kind of go down a rabbit hole in nature. Okay, and so we have persuasive arguments and social comparison here. And yes, America has become much more politically polarized. Um, well, we can add an additional 10 years here. This only goes to 2014. But why does group polarization happen? So, persuasive arguments. Okay, you hear new reasons supporting the position you already favor. I hadn't even thought of that. So you already believe something, but then you come to a discussion with like-minded people who add additional evidence to what you already believe. Then, oh, I'm sorry about this. Yeah, like-minded group members disproportionately create one-sided information, and there's not additional information that's added. That's part of the problem. The arguments favor one direction. And then you do have social comparison. You want a socially appropriate position. You think like, okay, I'm pretty supportive. Then you discover everybody else is super supportive. So you have to maintain a positive identity to fit the group norm. And so you have to be extremely supportive of that group position to fit in. And so we have a couple of callbacks here. And in regard to informational influence, you have those persuasive arguments, and that, oh my God, I didn't think about that. They must be right because I already kind of believe that. And normative influence, you want to fit in. You might have your beliefs might shift a little bit, but like, no, in order to fit into this group, I need to take on this belief. And then even naive realism comes into play because we subjectively construed this belief system about the world, and I see the world as it really is, and everybody else is wrong. And so my confidence grows. And a group can feel much more certain about something without becoming more accurate. And this becomes very easy when the social environment repeatedly gives us the same side of the argument. And in regard to the People's Temple in Jonestown, that's what happened because they were isolated from their families and friends and everything that they knew because they moved to Guyana and isolated themselves in a completely different country. And so you could think about this. Imagine your social world contains mostly people who think like you, share similar information, reinforce similar arguments, challenge the same opponents. And so over time, not only do you already agree, that enhances confidence, your views become stronger, and there's more agreement. So not only did this happen in somewhere like Jonestown, this is happening constantly online and in the worlds that we live. Your social media communities, workplace teams, friend groups, organizations, online forums. And again, consensus does not mean accuracy. Feeling certain does not mean that somebody or the group is more correct at all. And you can see this from my image here. Literally, this is the echo chamber problem. You're literally stuck in this bubble with only people that think like your access to the similar information. You only talk about the same things. You literally created an us versus them. And yeah, you do have people on the outside that are just saying, like, you guys are insane. And then what happens to somebody who introduces contradictory information? A healthy group would investigate it. A problematic group is going to ignore it. They're going to pressure the person to believe otherwise, or they're going to shut the person up. And so, literally, what if preserving agreement becomes more important than evaluating the decision? That's going to be groupthink. So, polarization takes into consideration how does discussion change the strength of our position? Whereas groupthink is what happens when the group stops to challenge itself. Polarization will include discussion. Groupthink stops discussing. That's an important delineation between the two. And when we return, we will go ahead and talk about groupthink.